In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro delves into the troubling implications of modern sexual culture, particularly focusing on the case of Lily Phillips, a 23-year-old OnlyFans creator who gained notoriety for a stunt in which she had sex with 101 men in a single day. Shapiro discusses the broader societal issues that this phenomenon represents, arguing that it reflects a deep moral decay in contemporary society. Phillips has become a prominent figure due to her lucrative OnlyFans account, where she reportedly earns millions by engaging in sexual acts for her subscribers. Shapiro highlights a documentary she produced titled "I Slept with 100 Men in One Day," which chronicles her experience during this extreme challenge. In the documentary, Phillips candidly discusses the emotional and psychological toll of her actions, revealing that the experience was far from pleasurable. She describes feelings of dissociation and regret, indicating that the act of having sex with so many men in such a short time was not just physically exhausting, but also emotionally distressing. Shapiro emphasizes that Phillips's experience is emblematic of a larger issue, the commodification of sex and the normalization of behaviors that degrade human dignity. He argues that the societal acceptance of platforms like OnlyFans reduces intimate relationships to mere transactions, stripping away the emotional and spiritual significance that should accompany sexual encounters. A significant portion of the discussion revolves around the concept of consent, which Shapiro critiques as being overly simplistic in the context of sexual morality. He references social psychologist Jonathan Haidt's framework of moral matrices, which includes various dimensions of morality beyond just care versus harm. Shapiro argues that while consent is necessary, it is not sufficient to determine the morality of sexual acts. He posits that a society that prioritizes consent above all else risks losing sight of deeper moral values, such as sanctity and degradation. Shapiro contends that the liberal perspective, which often emphasizes individual liberty and consent, fails to account for the potential harm individuals may inflict upon themselves through their choices. He suggests that Phillips's actions, while consensual, are ultimately self-destructive and indicative of a broader societal malaise. He argues that true liberty should not equate to libertinism, and that individuals have a moral obligation to uphold the sanctity of their own bodies and souls. The podcast further explores the idea of the sacred versus the profane, with Shapiro asserting that society must recognize and uphold certain values as sacred. He argues that the degradation of human dignity, as exemplified by Phillips's actions, undermines the very fabric of community and shared values. Shapiro posits that when society loses its sense of the sacred, it becomes increasingly difficult to establish a moral framework that can guide behavior and foster healthy relationships. He emphasizes that the individual human soul is sacred and that people have a duty to care for their own souls. Shapiro expresses concern that the normalization of behaviors like those exhibited by Phillips leads to a culture that devalues human life and dignity. He argues that a society that celebrates such actions is ultimately doomed to moral decay. Shapiro transitions to discuss a recent violent incident involving the alleged assassination of a healthcare CEO, which he frames as a symptom of societal unrest and moral confusion. He critiques the notion that violence can be justified in the pursuit of political change, arguing that such beliefs undermine the sanctity of human life. He highlights the dangerous rhetoric surrounding healthcare and the potential for individuals to resort to violence when they feel disenfranchised. In this context, Shapiro critiques figures like Bernie Sanders, who advocate for healthcare as a human right while failing to acknowledge the complexities of the healthcare system. He argues that the oversimplification of such issues can lead to dangerous consequences, including the justification of violence against individuals perceived as part of the problem. As the podcast progresses, Shapiro notes a cultural shift among the American public, particularly regarding issues of race and identity politics. He cites polling data indicating that a significant majority of Americans favor a colorblind approach to societal issues, rejecting the divisive rhetoric often espoused by progressive activists. Shapiro argues that this shift reflects a growing discontent with the excesses of wokeness and a desire for a more unified society. He emphasizes that the American people are increasingly rejecting the notion that identity should dictate policy and societal norms. This rejection of identity politics, according to Shapiro, is a positive development that could lead to a more cohesive and harmonious society.